actually provide technology and services that enable people to take part in activities, and that includes things such as sports, endurance events, government, faith, and also corporate events, which is what we're obviously here to talk about today.
And as Michelle mentioned, I'm the marketing manager for Cisco Live, which is Cisco's largest user conference. So we'll be going through some of that later on in the presentation.
Yeah. So first of all, what we thought we would do is just explain how we're going to break this up. And what we thought we would do is, to start with, we're just going to talk about a little bit about how we see things together, how we see the new age of technology and communication, and how people are engaging with audiences. So starting with understanding your audience, first of all. Secondly, engaging the audience. Then how to personalize the experience. Some practical examples from our friends at Cisco. And then we wanted to really leave you guys and the audience online with 5 really easy, practical things that you can do to help drive attendance at your events. And then obviously we'll end with some questions. So the first thing that we really did was just looking at the title of this event and understanding how things have changed in the live events and the online events industry. Is that it's now all become about the audience. So when we look at marketing and we look at advertising, we look at the way that people are now being communicated with, it's become a very personalized experience. You look at people like iTunes and Amazon and those guys, and as anyone that's bought anything from any of those places, you will always get personalized recommendations made on what you are interested in. So for us, really, the first thing was that the most important word in the title that we have for this session today is the word audience. And what we mean here is it's about understanding who your audience are. And when it comes to acquisition and actually bringing people to an event, we think the most important thing to do really is to understand exactly who it is you're talking to. And given that we're all operating in this high-paced world now where we work even harder than we ever have, we've got families, we've got social and online activities that are pulling on our time, it's very, very important from our experience to really understand what your audience need and to add value to their personal and their business lives. It's also, from there, in order to understand them, important to engage them in what we call a persistent and ongoing conversation. And the reason for that simply is that it stops us having to do so much guessing about what's going to attract somebody to come to an event, to leave their office, to leave their family for a few days, as we all have here, and actually attend that event. And in order to do that, we need to listen to them, and we need to understand them. And that's what technology essentially allows us to do. So we're going to talk a bit about technology, how it can help us to understand and listen to our audiences, and therefore to add value to them by giving them what they want and helping them to come to our events. Mm-hmm. So just briefly, what do participants want? And in our experience, the 2 main reasons that a person will actually attend an event, both online or physically, is content and networking. And what's happening now, as we just talked about in the example, is it's about giving them relevant content. So things that they're really, really interested in that are going to affect them, that they can leave the event and say, do you know what I found out at that event and what I learned has helped my life. It's helped me in my business, it's made me more effective, more efficient, it's helped me in my personal life, whatever it will be. And that's what gives us that personalized experience. They're looking for a more personalized experience, and they're looking for more interaction. And back to the old terms of conference being to confer and to talk with each other rather than to just sit and listen. This is the new generation that we're all living in. And really, as you'll see on the right-hand side there, the way that we see it at Active Network and Cisco the same, it's about the participant being at the middle, being the center of everything we do, and we will communicate with them through a series of different techniques, virtual, mobile, email, live, in order to continue that conversation with them. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. So just to explain a little bit about the way that we see this new generation of things and how we can use technologies to understand our audience and drive them to the event is a graph that we've kind of created that explains the new makeup of live events and technology. So on the left here we have engagement, and at the bottom we have time. And at a moment in time, an event traditionally would take place. And in the old days, not even a few years ago probably, the engagement with an audience around an event would look a little bit like this. So we'd invite them, we'd say, hey, we're holding an event. and we'd pull them into a registration and they'd register for that event. We'd then all get together on site at the event and we would understand and talk and learn from each other. We'd then probably do a little bit of surveying and then we'd all say goodbye, see you next year. And I'm being a tiny bit flippant in that description, but does everyone kind of agree that that is how it's traditionally been? So what we found is that when we take the event out of the picture completely, and this was the old sort of fears of, is virtual ever going to replace live, which of course we all know that it isn't, and actually is going to supplement it. But when we start to engage with our audience through the new means of communication, such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, those social media channels, blogs, RSS feeds, email, the good old faithful really, online communities, virtual events, mobile technologies, and webinars, webcasts, etc. What we tend to see is a far flatter but sustained engagement with our audience. And what that's also doing is it's what we call that ongoing conversation. So we start to actually really talk to the audience early on, we start to understand what they're interested in, and we can then start to use that understanding to communicate with them on a personalized level to then pull them in to our live event. So then when we put the live event back into the picture, in addition to this ongoing conversation that we have through these new media channels, what we get is a far higher level of engagement that is sustained, and also it gives us that really smart, informed content. So again, this is the concept that we're all talking about, and there's certain elements, as Stacey's going to talk about a little later on, of how you can use each of these really practically. But really, when it comes down to acquiring our audience, probably our key message here is let's understand them. And the great news is that we have a whole bunch of new technologies that can help us to do that and engage them in that early conversation. So what this gives us really is informed content, sustained awareness around the event and our brand, and what we value most of all, actually, in participant engagement, which gives us that increased audience. Does that generally make sense to most people? Is there anything that anyone doesn't agree with there or like to add? Great. So what we thought we would do from here is the next stage from this is, again, it's about personalizing that experience, because what we've talked about a lot is that audience engagement is not just about engaging people before the audience, it's about actually engaging them to understand what to do with them next. Because as we know, an event is a moment in time in that conversation with the audience, but we want to keep them engaged. So what we've spent a lot of time doing, again, at Active Network and working with Cisco as well, is to understand how to personalize that experience on site and really understand our audiences. And what we're looking at here really is a slightly ugly slide, and I apologize for that, but it sort of makes its point that traditionally, when people went to an event, we didn't spend a lot of time actually understanding them. We didn't spend a lot of time actually tracking what they were doing and therefore trying to respond to what they were doing and what they were telling us. So we spent a lot of time, as we said, putting in place various tools and technologies that allow us to track every touch point that an attendee has at an event, from email invitation or banner advertising that drives registrations, web analysis that actually tells us where those registrations are coming from, which type of online activity is really getting people engaged, mobile applications which can then engage them with us and we can start to communicate through those devices pre, during and post-event, online communities, which we're going to talk about again, Stacey's going to be talking about that quite a bit, and the ability to build up a profile. So to say to them, what are you interested in getting from this event? Rather than having them spend time too much in the demographics of the registration and giving us all of their information, it's what do you want to get from this event? What would it really help you to leave here knowing? Because once we know that, we can start to help them to get that, which adds value to them, which is going to keep them coming back, saying positive things, and help us again with that audience acquisition. Lead management technologies for our exhibitors so that we can actually understand who's speaking to who. Session monitoring, as I think we have, certainly PCMA had that here, so we can understand what sessions people are going to, and then online and mobile surveys. So we can really quickly and in real time start to ask people those questions and understand what's going on with them and what's working.
And the most important part about this is that your clients are actually giving you the information that you need to then feed additional opportunities for your company in terms of inviting them to your event, to different events, et cetera. They're actually providing you with the information that you need to then market to them later.
Yeah. Because the question we've always asked ourselves is, and in fact all of our clients I think is, but what next? What do we say to them after the event? How can we engage them if we look at kind of the funnel, if we're a big event like convening leaders, for example, what's the next communication with them? Which webinar or seminar or chapter event do we invite them to based on those interests? And I think, again, it all comes back to this ongoing audience acquisition. And so having all of that information in one place and then being able to feed that back into a database gives us that intelligence that allows us to have a personalized next step for every single participant. And just as an example, this is an idea of what it could look like. It just starts to give you an idea of what somebody's interested in, the groups they've joined, the sessions that they booked versus the sessions that they actually attended, the feedback that they gave to those sessions, the one-to-one meetings they booked, any exhibitor meetings, and then what we call a reason to contact report, which just simply really is an open field that asks the attendee, what would you like to know more about? What would you be interested to find out more about? As a result of that session, is there anything more you want to know? We're just looking for that data that says, let us give you personalized quality communication as a follow-up to this. And what we're actually looking at doing with some of our association clients is actually making this a customer-facing or a delegate-facing certificate of attendance that says to their boss or to their whoever it is that's allowed them to go, look what I did at the event. I wasn't just there for the great party at the Venetian, which was a good party. And I think we think that's really important, and we're seeing a lot of positive feedback from this kind of thing. So really the takeaway from this is understand your audience, understand what individually they want, and speak to them on a personalized basis.
Right, great. So based on what Anthony just talked about, I'm going to just give you a little bit of insight into what we've done at Cisco Live. So first of all, a little bit about the event itself. So Cisco Live is Cisco's largest user conference. It's a customer conference. We work with customers of all levels, from engineers all the way through senior executives. The event's been around for about 22 years. It was formerly known as Networkers, if some of you are more familiar with that. We have both a physical event as well as a virtual component. We leverage a virtual platform. We also stream content on Ustream. The event took place last June in Las Vegas here. We had 12,000 people on site and about 30,000 attending virtually. And that was on our virtual platform as well as viewing content on Ustream. And in addition, this program actually won the Grand X Award last year at Event Marketer for the best program of the year. And that was largely due to incorporating virtual into it. And for us, really, the 2009 was the first time that we introduced virtual as an attendance option. We always had content available on demand post-event, and we had for many years. But the economic situation in 2009 made it more difficult for our core customers to attend our event. Our event costs about $22.95. That's your ticket to come to the event, plus a week of travel and expense. So in a year when travel and training costs were being cut, that was obviously a pretty big challenge for us. So the virtual option was really an answer to economic conditions. And what we learned from it is that it opened up opportunities to keep audiences who weren't able to join us on site. And it also allowed us to extend our content far beyond where we ever thought it could go to new audiences. So this is a little bit about what you were talking about with the graph. So this is what our marketing cycle used to look like, and I'm sure it's familiar to many of you in the room. It was about a 6-month cycle. We would work really hard and kick off the conversation. We would turn up the volume. We would make a lot of special offers. We did a lot of communicating, a lot of talking, a lot of outreach, ramped up pretty high. People come to the event, we thank them, we survey them, and then we really do kind of close that conversation, and we then ramp it up all over again the next year. And it was really very event-centric. Obviously, everything we were talking about was come to our event. What we're looking at now is a more continuous marketing cycle, and that's talking about that level of engagement, keeping the conversation going year-round, which actually, in some cases, is easier for us as marketers because we can have smaller conversations year-round and then turn up the volume where necessary, but you're not doing that ramp-up. But the major difference is that for us here, it's a community-centric demand gen program, meaning that we are feeding people into our community, which is called Cisco Live and Networkers Virtual. And in addition, Cisco Live, I should have mentioned this earlier, is a global program. So there are 4 major global events taking place around the world from the Cisco Live brand. The major event is here in the United States. So at any time in this cycle, you have people who have the option to attend an on-site event. You also have call to action to go to intermediate events that we have in the platform. That would include Ask the Experts and those kinds of things that just keep people engaged. You have new people coming into the community continuously who attended an on-site event or who came in through the virtual outreach that we do. Mm-hmm. So it allows us to use our community as the hub and to communicate out through that community. A little bit here about trying to get people into a community, and I know that there have been a lot of different presentations here this week about brand. Your brand is very, very important. For us at Cisco Live, we have a little bit of a benefit there because we have our own brand. Cisco Live is an established brand, but we're also working underneath a very established brand, which is Cisco. A lot of our research has shown that the more familiar that people are with your brand, the more likely they are to attend your event, the more likely they are to make the time and set aside the funding to come to your event. The nice thing about the virtual option is that you can capture that level of audience that may not be familiar with your brand, that may not be familiar with your product, but is interested in knowing more, and giving them options to familiarize themselves with your brand, with your content, with your products in a way that is a low level of commitment. Mm-hmm. And then moving them through the funnel is what we have found to be one of the most valuable assets that our community has to offer. So this, again, isn't a surprise to anyone in this room. These are some of the more traditional marketing channels that really we still use. Mm-hmm. Very valuable marketing channels to us. Web banners perform very well for us. Emails. We actually do a direct mail piece, which I will say that that's more important for our physical event. I would not recommend direct mail for a virtual event. Mm-hmm. However, it's something that helps us overcome some data challenges that we have in terms of number of opt-ins. So it is a valuable piece. And then, of course, your website, which is your most valuable marketing vehicle that anyone has. But we've augmented this, obviously, along with virtual. A whole new set of marketing activities have come along that are more appropriate and certainly more responsive for our virtual audiences, and that goes back to the community nature. So now everyone is operating around communities professionally, personally. So getting into that community, whether it's on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, those are very, very important means to reach your target communities and to be able to integrate yourself with them. So we have found that social media has been a very, very important driver for us. And I know there was a presentation this morning about social media, and there's some difficulties in measurement and the typical things. You know, some people think it's a fad, and some people think that it's really just a Me Too kind of thing, that if you're not out there doing it, then you should. Mm-hmm. For us specifically, social media has been the #1 driver of hits to our website. So that includes everything from email campaigns to we put banner ads on Cisco.com. And Cisco.com, again, we're very fortunate that we have that working on our behalf and that Cisco.com has a whole engine behind it drawing people into that we don't even have to work to get those audiences. Yeah. Even with that said, Twitter is actually the #1 click-through that we have right now coming to our website. And surprisingly, it's also the highest conversion rate, meaning that we measure who comes into the website, what they do, and if they actually purchase a registration pass. And
what I would say there is, in our experience, a lot of people, as you said, Stacey, think that we just turn social media on and stuff's going to happen. And it doesn't work like that. They are tools, but they need work, right? And they need people, again, who are understanding the audience, but also who are publishing content to pull people back into it. And I think if we could give any piece of advice around that is, you know, you've got to work those channels. You've got to put somebody in it that's going to actually be creating and distributing content to get people to come back. Is that fair?
That's fair. And really accessing your loyalists. As I mentioned, the event's been around for 22 years, so we have quite a few attendees who are very, very loyal to the brand, that it is a badge of honor that they get to come to the event every year, and they wear their t-shirt from 1997 to prove how happy they are to come every single year. So they're happy to talk about the event because they are proud attendees of the event. So that's where your brand becomes very important, and understanding who are the evangelists of your brand and let them work on your behalf.
Absolutely. And the nice thing for some of, are there any people in the audience from associations and societies right now? The great thing for you guys is you do have a captive audience. You know, you have your membership. And coming back to Stacey's point about it's about the community, you've got loyalists, and I think that, you know, if you can really engage them and engage the loyalist of the loyalists, then, you know, really get them to actually start to broadcast the message as well, is a very powerful way to do it.
One interesting example, so we talk about listening and we talk about talking to our customers about what kind of content. So on a less serious note, we actually polled our attendees and our customer base in general about what kind of band they would like to see at the concert. That's always a really big thing among our attendees. The two things are the backpack and the bag, or the backpack and the band. So we did a band poll on Twitter. We did it on our website as well. We had many, many more times the response on Twitter. And a funny thing happened. There was a write-in campaign for Weird Al Yankovic, who was not one of the original contenders for the event. However, it was interesting to see that spiral around in other communities that probably weren't aware of Cisco Live and certainly not talking about Cisco Live. But Weird Al Yankovic became our inroads into new opportunities. So that was an interesting example of how that happens.
Yeah. So out of all of these, the most surprising was Twitter as a means
It has
of
been
driving.
so far this year, and part of that has to do with we're getting better about how we measure it. Certainly, we're all getting used to how to measure an unstructured conversation like you have in social media, and certainly the technologies are improving. So that's been a major difference for us, is the ability to measure it. So we're learning more about our audience, and we're learning more about the effectiveness of keeping that conversation going and keeping that persistent presence in those communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Wanted to share with you some of the nuances, though. It really is different marketing a physical event and a virtual event, and in our case, we do both. It's a hybrid event. It takes place concurrently with our event, but then it's also getting people into that community. Our experience has been that if an audience member or an attendee has the money and the time to go, they will.
Yep.
We have not lost audience share at all to the virtual experience. Our attendees understand the difference between being here in person or joining us online. So obviously your highly loyal, most motivated audiences are those that will attend. Your newer audiences who are less familiar are those who are going to attend. One interesting note about Cisco Live is that we notice a year-over-year attendance pattern, and that has to do a lot with the nature of our attendees being systems engineers, network engineers. Can't have all of them out of the office at the same time. So typically it's your turn this year, your turn that year. Well, we were not really offering, if it wasn't your turn to go, it wasn't your turn to go, and the lights went out for you. So what we're finding is that we also have very loyal audiences in our virtual space who are unable to attend for other reasons. But if the ability to attend is there, we find that they'll come. Very key thing that we've learned there is emphasize the value of each experience. We position virtual as an alternative to attend, as an option to attend. We never ever say that it's a replacement for being there in person. Doing so really creates disappointment all around. Your in-person audience will be disappointed that they could have paid a fraction of the cost to attend virtually. And your virtual audience will be disappointed that they're not receiving the same type of interaction that they would have received if they had gone on in person. So very, very key to be honest and upfront about the value of each type of option to attend. And then I'm often asked about timing and cadence and how do you preserve your on-site attendance, which for some of us, we have to drive a certain amount of our revenue from that on-site attendance. How do you do that, preserve that attendance without losing it to virtual? And again, our experience has been if people have the time and money to come, they will. But in order to safeguard against that, we don't talk about our virtual options until later on in the campaign. For us, that breaking point is the end of our lowest price point, which we call our early bird pricing. But we recognize that for our forecasting and modeling, we have to get a certain number of our attendees in the door and paid by that date. After that point, we start floating the virtual offer in a very targeted way. We know based on a couple of factors, mainly for us, it has to do with tenure with the event and proximity to the venue, making you more or less likely to attend. We start offering those least likely to attend the virtual option first, and then we gradually turn up the volume as we get closer to the event, and travel becomes a little bit less feasible at that point.
But there's a really good example, and we work with clients to do this, and I know you have it, of where you're using the virtual or the content distributed virtually to actually engage new audiences, and you talked about the sales
Yes,
teams.
so interesting use of our virtual platform at Cisco. we had several sales offices around the U.S. and actually a couple of customer audiences who gathered customers in the room and hosted a 2-day event at the sales office where they all got together and watched the event and participated in the event virtually, and then the sales office hosted an evening event. So it was an opportunity for them to touch the customers. It was an opportunity for them to give this content to their customers and serve as the host of that. And obviously for us, it was a win-win for us too, because we had more eyeballs on the content. We had more attendees that were participating in our event.
Yes. And we saw a great example with the British government, obviously in the UK, where they actually took a very focused event, but they distributed the content virtually. And it was so powerful to it was about a 300 or 400 people event, and it was then distributed to about 2,500 people. But it was so powerful to these regional participants that they actually then went and created events around that content themselves and as a follow-up. So, you know, they're both good examples of how you've taken the content from a physical event, you've distributed it virtually, and it's then gone on to create further events, further audiences, and engagement. I think that's a really good example of how it can be used.
Earlier I looked at a funnel, and one of the things that your community does in terms of audience acquisition, if your end goal is to get more people on site, which for some of us it is, and maybe for some of us it's not, for Cisco Live it is, we look at trying to move people through the funnel. So all of a sudden I have a sales pipeline, which is an unusual thing in an event situation. We offer different tiers of participation. We offer a free pass, we offer a paid pass virtually, and then obviously the full conference on-site pass. So one of the strategies we have is knowing who is in our community. We try to move them through the commitment funnel. We try to upsell them to the next level. And because they have told us who they are and what they're interested in, and through some of those technologies you showed earlier, we can target them with very, very specific messages that show the value to them specifically. If they have indicated their interest in a specific product type, we can send them a message about what's happening either at the paid virtual level or on site with respect to that technology.
Yep.
So that really is the end goal. Secondarily, though, I think that we should all recognize that in this new wave of virtual participation, there will be people who came in the door virtually and will probably stay there. They will become familiar with that and comfortable with that experience, and they may never move to the on-site. And that's fine. You should be always continuing to maintain them in your community.
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the questions that we were asked is, how do you combat attrition? Virtual events are famous for high attrition rates.
Yes.
One of the things that we do is we charge for our content. I did mention that we have a free pass, but we do charge for the full access, essentially. There's a few things that we do to engage the audience, and it really is all about engagement. I'm showing an example here of a picture of the Cisco booth at our event, and then the Cisco booth in the virtual environment. One of the things that we try to do is we try to create a compelling reason for people to attend that day and not just to come back on demand. So there are things happening on site that are being broadcast virtually. There are things virtually that are affecting on site, whether they're asking questions, whether they're having an on-site a chat with one of our executives. There are inroads between the two. So I think the experience is very, very important. Create a compelling reason why they need to be sitting at their desk at that moment. Secondarily, we actually do a fairly aggressive communications plan. They probably feel like we're nagging them at the end of the day, but we are reminding them over and over and over, don't forget to log in, don't forget to log in. This is what's happening. And certainly those messages can be customized as well. So it can be a broadcast message about make sure you don't miss out on 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., but you can be more specific too based on what you know that they have indicated they're interested in.
So you find that obviously when people have to pay for a ticket, they are far more compelled to actually use what they've bought.
Absolutely, right.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, and I'd love to hear from any of the audience or anyone online how they've structured pricing for a virtual event versus a physical event, because I think it's an ongoing debate actually, based on the fact that if content truly is the key reason that people would attend an event, then theoretically, if you're consuming the same content online, then theoretically you'd pay almost the same as you would to go to the event. But I think it's an interesting discussion that I'd love to hear some feedback on, if there was anybody that had any.
And when we actually debuted our virtual attendance option in 2009, it was nearly unheard of at that point to be charging for a virtual event. And we really had to kind of take a deep breath and take a leap of faith there. But we have found that the content that we offer, we have about 500 technical sessions, and really it does have to do with the content. It's not sales content. It's not something that we're pushing out to the customer. It's something that the customer is asking us to provide. So we've had success with that.
Great, great.
A little bit about what's next. So these two things shouldn't come to any surprise. It's what we've been hearing all week. It's what you talked about in the beginning, is that it really is going to be about your community. So all of us, all of our interactions, personally and professionally, are increasingly centered on communities. So make sure that your event, your brand, has a community. Starting it doesn't happen overnight, but if you continue to learn more about your customers and you continue to learn more about what they want and what they need, and give them a reason to want to join your community, it turns into a really great marketing engine for you. And I do think, as I said, virtual event experiences will evolve, that we will see virtual attendees feeling a little more comfortable with the virtual experience. We will see sponsors. We do have sponsors in our virtual space feeling more comfortable how to staff a booth, how to have those conversations that typically would happen on a trade show floor, interaction between speakers. I think that it will feed new kinds of behaviors, and that we will be able to put new opportunities out there, whether for our sponsors or for our customers, based on those experiences. But again, certainly we're not going to ever replace an in-person event, and we should look at this as a complementary activity.
Absolutely. So what we thought we would leave you with, as we promised, is 5 things that you can do tomorrow, and some of them might be obvious, some of them might not, but we thought we'd start here. Number 1, I'm going to take number 1 if that's okay, but again, it might seem obvious, but advertise the event in your employee signatures. We have seen a huge results from this, and it seems like such an obvious thing, but we actually did quite a lot of tracking of what was driving registrations, and a couple of our clients specifically saw far more results from this than they did from web banners in certain places, for example. It's not to say don't do the web banners, but it's to say definitely do this.
And we did that. We asked all of our customer-facing employees at Cisco to use it. Now, how many of them did, it's certainly impossible to track, but we asked not only our salespeople, but what are considered our sales engineers, who are, in Cisco's case, a lot of the communication with the customers happens through the sales engineer, and even our customer response team, so people who are calling into the call center or who are logging issues, we've asked them to put this on their email signature, and actually it had a big effect for us.
Absolutely.
Leverage your main corporate website. So some of you may already be doing that. For us, we have our own website. But if there's a brand that you're associated with that's bigger than you, make sure that you're using it. So for us, that's Cisco. And we advertise all over the Cisco website. We negotiate placement of key pieces. We place videos up there. And last year, we saw that that was our #1 referral engine, even over Google. After we did extensive search engine optimization work, it still is our #1 referral engine.
This one probably seems, again, a bit obvious, but encourage those key ambassadors to spread the word. Speakers, senior people within your business, key stakeholders, they all have large networks, be it LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter followers, etc. But we really have to get them engaged and make it part of their job, really, to get the message out there, because they do have big networks between them.
Leverage existing channels to amplify your message. This goes a little bit about, it's on the same lines of leveraging your corporate website. So if there's a brand that you are aligned with, and they have a strong Twitter following, they have a very predominant LinkedIn group, they have a lot of fans on Facebook, whatever those channels are, make sure that you're tapping into them, so that you're not working as hard to create your own, but you're tapping into brands that already have a lot of power associated with them.
Yeah. I'm going to let you take 5 as well.
The 5 was identify and monitor your competition. So I think we all know who we're competing against for attendees. In some cases, it may be somebody in your own company. So that's a different conversation that you should have if you identify that you are competing with another team at your own company. However, I think it's very important to understand the tactics that your competition is using, the messaging that they're using. and even if you can participate virtually, what their event looks like and what they're doing.
Absolutely. So I think hopefully we've taken you through some of the concepts and how we look at things. We've given some practical examples as well. Frankly, it's a discussion that could go on for days, and we'd love to hear some feedback from the audience about anything that you found that really works, and hopefully these 5 core things that we've left you with.
Really, a couple of quick questions. One is, you brought up an interesting point about the pricing of physical versus virtual. I was just curious about how you priced your virtual event. You mentioned $22.95 for physical, and is there a range or a ratio you're seeing that virtual is X% typically of physical?
Well, I can tell you that our pricing is $395, so it's a lot less than the virtual. The virtual is $395. The on-site is $22.95. Now, clearly, we all know that there's a lot of cost involved with having people on site, and the experience is different. That number was arrived at due to research in the industry on what other conferences were charging for similar, and really we didn't find a lot of conferences that had a similar experience in terms of the number of sessions available. We've also, and that's a year subscription I should mention, so if you purchase that, you not only have access to those 2 days of content during our event, you can go to the other 3 events that are taking place around the world, and then you have all of the content available on demand for a year. We've since introduced more flexible pricing because we found that people said, well, I really just was interested in these 2 sessions or these 3 sessions. So we did introduce an a la carte pricing model where you can buy the session. And then obviously you reach a certain threshold where it's more affordable just to pay for the entire experience.
Yeah, so one other quick related question is, what kinds of special offers and promotions did you try over time that you found to be the most effective drivers?
So interestingly enough, Refer a Friend, which has been around for years, is something that we have found where we reward people for referring qualified registrations, both on-site as well as virtually. We have thrown virtual in as a perk in some cases. For on-site attendance, you've got the full enchilada, you have your $22.95 and you get everything, and you also get the virtual community. But then we have some lower price point options where you're attending just a few things on site. We throw virtual in as a perk. So in that case, we're using it as an opportunity to do 2 things, is offer extra value for that price, for that pass, but we're also getting more people into that community. So then now I have that person that I can upsell them next year to probably pay full price or to hopefully pay full price. So that's been effective. We typically don't do a lot of price breaks simply because our revenue model will not support that. So we tend to throw in things where we've already paid for the virtual platform. It doesn't cost us anymore to throw that in as a perk. So that's where we've used it as a way to add additional value to some of the on-site packages.
There's lots of different discussions and comments going on Twitter, but one thing that they're talking about is this aspect of community and the relationship of your community, your social community, to your success in driving attendance at your live event. So you have this sort of built-in community, versus net new attendees from Twitter or wherever. How much of the built-in community that exists is going to your live event on a continual basis? So how valuable is that community to you?
Of our people who are in our virtual platform?
People that are on your Facebook page or you're following you on Twitter.
That's where we'd like to get with measurement. Because the problem is taking someone's Twitter handle and understanding if they really are coming to your event is very difficult data to actually get at. And it's very hard to quantify social media. This is our limitation, and I'm sure that we'll overcome this at some point, is quantifying who those people are. We know anecdotally from the results that we've seen measuring, we use a tool called Site Catalyst to measure who comes into our event through a social media channel and then what they do. So we see that our social media visitors are terribly prone to then buying an event, and terribly is not the right word. They are terrifically prone to buying a pass. Anecdotally, that tells us that the people who are following us on Twitter, who are fans of ours on Facebook, and who are in our LinkedIn groups are our loyalists. As we continue to measure that, the real gold mine there is understanding at a deeper level who those people are. But right now, we can only look at it as a vehicle and understand what our conversion rates are associated with it.
And I think what we've seen, Michelle, is that you can use some of these. We all talk about communities, and everyone says, oh, I'm going to build a community around an event, but we're inundated by communities that we could join. And I think what we've got to look at, and the successes we've seen, is that you use the communities and the social media and social networks that are out there, again, to raise awareness, to get conversations going, to engage the loyalists, to actually then go and engage those that haven't heard of us. But what we really want to do is pull those loyalists into an owned community, which is what you guys have done really well. It's what we've seen a lot of other people do really well. Again, especially associations, because you've got such a great loyal gathering. But pull them into a community that you own and that you can control. And that's when it starts to become really interesting, and where we're going with things, and obviously with you guys, but we're looking at ways that we can engage them through mobile technology, if you like, that says you're a member of the community. Every time you're going to have an application that is also specifically for members of this community, and every time a new piece of content, a new event, something new happens, we're going to tell you about it through the device. We're going to allow you to click on it and access it. But again, we're tracking and we're understanding what you're accessing and what you're doing, so we can continue to then push relevant content back to you. So I think there are two levels of community, is what I would say. There's the ether of communities, and then there's the owned communities.
Right. And the end goal is to get them into that owned community.
Yes. It gives value to the organization and to the member or the attendee.
So you talked about the live experience versus the virtual experience, so as not to make anyone unhappy. How do you make the case to your attendees how rich the live is versus virtual, but not discounting the virtual attendees so that they'll at least pay that much? I mean, how do you differentiate between the two without cannibalizing either one?
Interesting question there. So obviously people come to the event for the content, and as you pointed out, the content's available virtually as well. It's the interaction, definitely, from a professional and frankly a social level that differentiates the on-site experience. The nature of our attendees is that they learn so much from each other. And the ability to sit next to someone at lunch and talk about a specific IT challenge that you are trying to tackle. We offer a number of expert-driven interactions on site where you can talk to a Cisco engineer, you can talk to the person who built the tools that you're using, you can talk to our technical support staff. Those are opportunities that we make available in limited ways in a virtual sense, but I think that we all, as attendees of events, recognize the value of an in-person experience. And then there are certain social activities that are very important to our attendees. The big party is really, it's a huge part of their experience, and none of us like to admit that people come to the event for the party, but it's a big differentiator. We don't sell the event based on the party, because that certainly doesn't help any of our attendees make a case for attending. I'm going to Vegas to go hear train. That doesn't really help anybody get justification from their boss to go to the event.
Not easily, no.
But that it's typically it's the level of interaction, it's the access to 150 partners on site, all of the things that are happening on site. The world is kind of open to you at that point. From a virtual standpoint, that's really for someone who is looking for an experience that is a little bit less intense and certainly offers fewer opportunities to interact, but we try to make it as rich and as interactive as we can based on the virtual platform.
Yeah.
I have a question here specifically for you, Stacy.
Okay.
How do you keep up with your customers' changing interests in content, and how to acquire the information? How do you acquire the information?
So a couple of different ways. We do extensive surveying after the event. We do use the Active platform, and that gives us a tremendous amount of information, not only self-provided information when they register. We ask them a lot of questions about themselves and also their key interests. We also can look at what sessions they went to and where those sessions have rated highly. We do a tremendous amount of surveying in our virtual platform where we're asking them to either to provide feedback on a specific type of content or to provide feedback about a specific type of the event. So that's one of the forums that we use. And really our customers are fairly willing to tell us. We have no trouble gathering feedback from them about what they want to see at the event.
I think one of the biggest things is just ask them. We seem to be scared to actually ask people what they want. And I've worked with people, program managers in big companies that are losing sleep about what should I say at the event. I've got 500 sessions and I don't know what to say, and the reality is we've got to ask them. And now we've got technology that can allow us to do that. And I think it's just really important to do the basics.
So it's a combination, I would say, of actually collecting verbatim feedback and also taking a look at all of the data that we've shown that give you intelligence about your customers. We ask them forward-thinking questions about where do you think you're going to be in 2 years? So we want to be able to know that we can anticipate their learning needs and deliver content that will keep them coming back to our event.
And again, as we said, our platform is designed so it not only tracks that on attendee journey, if you like, it also can track the virtual journey. So we integrate with an expo, for example, and we can start to understand the content that people are accessing. And again, we can then start to make suggestions and about what's the next piece of communication. Because also, if at an event we can see by the journey or the sequence of sessions that somebody goes to, we can start to build a picture up pretty quickly of actually what they're trying to do. And we did something for another client where we tracked the sessions that people were attending, and we could tell very quickly from this passage that they took that about 280 people at the event were in the buying process of a certain product. And what we were able to do then was we were able to actually put the business development team from that product in touch with those people and actually able to have a conversation with them based on what they were telling us through their actions rather than through their words. And again, I think that's what technology allows us to do. It allows us to be smart and personalize that communication.
Okay, I think that's it.
If there are
a
question?
Oh, one more right over here.
Michelle, there's just one here, over here.
Oh, great.
Kind of going back to the discussion about cannibalizing and live versus virtual, obviously for Cisco, you had such an established event and such a large crowd that adding a virtual component, there was probably not a lot of fear, but that's still something I encounter a lot is people being afraid that, if we add a virtual component, it's going to cannibalize our live event. I know you're finding the opposite. Is there anywhere, case studies, data, anything that I can show people to say, look, this is not going to harm and it will actually drive more interest in your live event?
I actually can give you a study if you want me to jump in. It's a bit of an anecdotal study. Well, first of all, I'm Sheriff Kermit with PCMA. Our last year, our annual meeting, had 800 people participate virtually. And the response back after that was that we really wanted to come to the next year's meeting. So the response was overwhelming. But what we did was a study of corporate companies, not association, but corporate companies. It was 20 of them, including Cisco. And we did their ramp up of virtual events over the past 3 years and what happened to face-to-face events. And in every case, the face-to-face events actually increased as well as the virtual events. So if that helps. I'm not sure. I will have to ask permission to share that stuff, but that was the survey. It was done.
Yes.
And I will say there was tremendous fear. The first year we did this in 2009, we were very, very conservative about how we marketed the event. That year we were in San Francisco and we knew that people from the Southeast United States would be the least likely to come based on our demographics. And we were very quiet about the virtual until we kind of knew that we had enough people in the door, and then we started again bleeding it out, and we started in the Southeast and started kind of working our way west. But there was tremendous trepidation on our part. We have actually seen our event grow as a result of the virtual community.
And one of the things that we've seen is virtual allows people that have never attended before a very easy entry point to actually find out whether or not it's going to be something that's of use to them. rather than, getting on a plane and et cetera, to find out they can start to understand there. And that's what then leads to them, as Sheriff said, we want to come. We now get it. We get the contents right for us. We're going to get on the plane next year.
Mm-hmm. You're looking for the
stats.
Where's the white paper? I understand.
Yeah. Okay, we'll make one. I don't know how, but we will.
I'm sorry, ma'am, go ahead.
This is not a question. This is an actual answer
Okay.
to your question, because I asked the same question in another session, and that person indicated that on Virtual Edge, there are studies on the Virtual Edge website, the company Virtual Edge that runs the summit, that they have studies on their website.
Great. Well, it is now time for lunch here in Las Vegas. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Stacy. And please take the opportunity to go around and see our vendors and learn more about virtual platforms, and we'll see you after lunch. Thanks.